Breaking overnight, the U.S. military says it conducted new strikes on 3 alleged drug trafficking boats. The U.S. military says 8 people were killed. These attacks in the Eastern Pacific this time bring the number of people killed during this entire military campaign by the president to at least 95 since it began in September. This also comes as the justification for these strikes is being put more and more in the spotlight and, quite frankly, under a microscope. CNN's Elena Trine is at the White House for us this morning with the latest here. Elena, the Defense Secretary, the Secretary of State, they're briefing lawmakers today. What are you hearing about this?
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating because all lawmakers, Kate, both in the House and Senate, are expected to have these closed-door classified briefings with Hegseth and Rubio today. So we're told that the first briefing is going to be with senators at 10 a.m., of course, on these ongoing military operations in the Pacific and the Caribbean, and then afterwards they'll give a similar briefing to the House. Now, we also know that the House Armed Services Committee is expecting to have a briefing later this week with Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley, I should say. He likes to go by Mitch. He's the one who had led that operation back in September, that double tap strike on a boat traveling off the coast of Venezuela that ended up, becoming the subject of much scrutiny over these operations of late. And so all of this is going to be fascinating because a lot of lawmakers have been asking for this kind of access to a lot of these classified materials and getting answers from people like Hegseth and Rubio who have been behind a lot of these operations. Now, of course, I think one of the most interesting things is going to have our relentless Hill reporters chasing down these different lawmakers after these briefings. I know they'll be doing that. And specifically, I think I'm eager to hear the reaction from a lot of the Republican lawmakers who have been critical of many of these strikes. But as you mentioned, despite all of the scrutiny we've seen over these broader operations, and specifically that strike I mentioned, that double tap strike back in September, the military and the Pentagon have not slowed down their operations. We saw the more strikes last night against 3 alleged drug trafficking boats in the Eastern Pacific. That now brings the total number of people who are expected to have been killed in these strikes to at least 95 people. Another thing is we also saw the president take a big move last night by declaring or classifying narcotics and fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, a huge move that is going to try and provide even more legal basis for what they're doing with these operations, Kate.
Yeah, which is interesting, though, because when it comes down to it, there was a lot of conversation of what's coming out of Venezuela and what's coming out of Colombia. It's not fentanyl. That's not where it's coming from anyway. So there's maybe a justification for a different problem. Elena, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
The U.S. military says 8 people are dead following a strike on 3 alleged drug trafficking boats in the Eastern Pacific. U.S. Southern Command, in a post on X, says the boats were moving along known, quote, narco trafficking routes and were engaged in narco trafficking. Now, this, as the president says, he's calling illegal fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction.
We're formally classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, which is what it is. No bomb does what this is doing.
Joining me now in the group chat, Zolan Kano-Young, CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for the New York Times, Chuck Rocha, former senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns, and Ashley Davis, former White House official under George W. Bush. And it's Kano-Young. Sorry about that, Zolan. So I was reading this executive order, and it says illicit fentanyl is closer to a chemical weapon than a narcotic. And people have talked about how lethal fentanyl can be, even to the touch. But it's also talking about the idea of like how you go after it. Does this designation mean anything in terms of how the government operates, or is this kind of a rhetorical or political exercise?
There's no doubt the devastating toll fentanyl has taken on the United States, but there are real questions about how accurate the descriptions are in this executive order and what the practical impact would be. The executive order is making a claim that this isn't just a means of terrible addiction and having the root of a drug epidemic in the United States, but rather that it's been used as an actual weapon of war, a weapon of mass destruction.
I should say, to read one part, it says the potential for fentanyl to be weaponized for concentrated, large-scale terror attacks.
Right.
By adversaries is a serious threat to the United States. Is that a threat you've been hearing about?
Yeah, I think it is just, well, first of all, there's two things. If you have, like you said earlier, if you have a family member that was impacted by fentanyl, you would want it to be called a weapon of mass destruction, right? I mean, the drug is horrible. I do think that there's ramifications of it being called that because of what they are probably will ask Congress for eventually. I mean, if you see what's
So this
happened-
is paving the road to that? Because the
think
last
so.
time we talked about weapons of mass destruction, we ended up in what is now called a forever war,
Yeah.
right? And the pursuit of that and the evidence of that, this is language that is familiar to the American people.
And let me be clear. Any American wants to keep drugs out of America. We want to keep drugs out of the hands of children. But there are protocols that you go through in engagement. And Ashley said something really important. She goes, when he takes it to Congress, Congress is the one who is supposed to wage war. And there should be a War Powers Act that we've been currently going under a continued resolutions forever. Yesterday, Senator Ruben Gallego in Arizona brought this up because he's like, Congress are supposed to be the ones saying if and when we go to war, unless there's an imminent threat, which is what you saw yesterday in the language that he put in the executive order.
Let me push back on this for a second. The Defense Department report, they released a national security strategy just a few weeks ago. And what they wanted to do was elevate the fight and the war on drugs, right? Saying that the use of lethal force to replace these boat strikes, which we can show you all of them all at once practically, to replace a failed law enforcement only strategy. So they know there's a way to do this through policing, but they're saying that has failed for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I think it's fair to see this in the vein of the administration trying to build their argument to justify their actions in the Caribbean and off the Pacific that have gathered more and more bipartisan criticism over its legality when you're talking about these strikes against these
And the
vessels.
seizure of the oil tanker was in some circles seen as an escalation as well, militarily.
That's right. To build the case as you continue these strikes or potential action against the land of Venezuela, too, and any sort of action against Maduro that the president has mused about at this point. I do think it's worth saying, though, experts have said that fentanyl has only been used in a gas attack once in 2002 by the Russians. The National Defense University also released a report. They study potential weapons of mass destruction, these kind of designations. They said this wouldn't be necessary for fentanyl as well, that it's more of a public health emergency or law enforcement.
So they aren't
definition.
willing to call it a chemical weapon just yet.
Just yet.
Yeah, okay. In the meantime, Ashley, I want to leave it to you because what happens within an administration as people start to mobilize the argument for wartime activity?
Well, first of all, you see what they're doing today. I mean, in the House and Senate, that you have Secretary Rubio and you have Secretary Hegseth both in Congress briefing. Obviously, they're talking about the double tap situation in September, but they're also laying the groundwork of, and you watched, and I was on the show, we have Democratic congressmen now that they've been briefed, which was very important, kind of going back on some of the things they've been criticizing the administration about because they're actually giving classified information that us, as the American people, don't know of how bad things are. But let me just say one more thing. Venezuela is not just about fentanyl. It's not just about the drugs. Let's remember it's also about Russia and Ukraine.
Why not say that? Why go through
Because
this
I think
thing
that's-
with
I
like
think-
overdose deaths?
Don't fit in a TV commercial.
The facts don't exactly back up the account that the administration has put out about Venezuela producing all of this fentanyl. Fentanyl comes from precursors from China that are then produced in Mexico. Most of the drugs that have come from Venezuela actually end up going to Europe when you talk to national defense officials. So also the account here that this is all about drugs, facts don't exactly back up that account as well.
Well, it'll be interesting to see as this argument builds and builds, something like an executive order. Next, there'll be a statement, and we'll see at what point the war on drugs is just a war.